Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. This is David Krayden broadcasting to you live from Ottawa, and looks like an overcast day here. We've had some great weather lately. But when we come back, what does Donald Trump really want from Canada? And what does Mark Carney think he's offering? Very important question right now. We'll be right back.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. Yes, please subscribe if you haven't already. Resubscribe if you must do so. We appreciate it. Share this broadcast with your friends and family. And by the way, this is one of my latest. Krayden's right, in nobody's pocket. That's what I keep saying. I've been saying that since the day I began this broadcast. I'm not here to endorse any political party. I can say one is better than the other, but I don't tell you how to vote. I don't tell you who to support. And I reserve the right to criticize any politician or political party. That's why I don't work for any political party. I don't belong to any political party. Obviously, I prefer small c conservative, small l libertarian politicians and political parties than I do socialists or communists or capital L liberals. But I reserve the right to criticize. I want to thank Diana Reed, who bought 25 coffees yesterday after watching my interview with retired Army Colonel Douglas McGregor. This guy is dynamite. And I don't think he's ever said anything that I can really disagree with. I think he's a fantastic military analyst, the best, better than these guys you see on Fox and CNN, these retired four-star generals who are just there to support the armaments industry, or what President Dwight Eisenhower referred to as the military industrial complex. And they're not there to talk about reality or the truth. They're there to talk about making more money. Now, I wanted to show you this. This is from Marty up north. Great stuff, Marty. And what he shows in this slide, we're shifting an economy based on people who don't produce anything, such as government workers. And the people who are losing their jobs are people who produce things. So this is why during the Trudeau years, there was an explosion in the public service. So it would look like the job losses weren't that catastrophic. But of course they were. And that's why the Canadian economy is so fragile and on the precipice of disaster. And I think that's something I can't overemphasize. So let's listen to this, and I've got a few slides to show you. But let's listen to this, and this is an incredible interview with Mark Carney and Christian Amanpour. And she calls Carney the Trump whisperer. But
President Trump tends to be A, transactional, and B, very personal. And sometimes he thinks, or maybe you know differently. Apparently
I don't think...
They say that you're the Trump whisperer of the leaders.
I'm not
and
sure
that you're on
but...
texting, relations with him, and you're constantly talking. So is he still saying he wants to annex Canada?
He's not. He's not. He admires Canada, I think it's fair to say, and maybe for a period of time coveted Canada. But
you've put that to bed.
Well, look, we're two sovereign nations who are discussing the future of our trade relationships, our defense partnership, which has been very strong in the past. How is that going to evolve? But again, I would say it this way: the president is focused on a series of changing bilateral relations. We're at NATO. He's been focused on making sure that all members, Canada included, of NATO pay their fair share, carry their weight. I think we are now doing that. We've made major investments in defense in recent months. We're now at the NATO 2%. We're committed to accelerating that. We've got this new defense partnership with Europe as another example. That's other countries stepping up. I don't see that is at all. I think that's positive. We're doing it for our own reasons, but I think it's positive for the U.S. relationship, not something that.
But it's pretty sudden and it's pretty overnight. The whole dumping you in the, now we have to take care of our own security, and not only that, we have to help prevent this increasing invasion by a hostile force in Europe, Russia, against a democratic, sovereign, and independent state.
Yes, and that runs on for quite a while.
President Trump tends.
But Mark Carney is not being exactly honest when he talks about this 5%. Canada commits the new NATO defense spending target of 5% of GDP. Okay? Sounds simple, doesn't it? However, once again, with anything Mark Carney says, or with any bill that Mark Carney promulgates, you have to look at the fine print and you have to look at the toxic pill in it. So what does this really mean? Well, as part of the 5% pledge, Canada will invest 3.5% of GDP for core military capabilities, expanding on recent investments. There's that word again. That means further investment in our Canadian Armed Forces, modernizing our military equipment and technology, building up Canada's defense expenditures, such as new airports, ports, telecommunications, emergency preparedness systems, and other dual use investments, which serve defense as well as civilian readiness. Okay, do you see what's going on here? This is, once again, not everything is as it appears to be. So I'm shaking my head. But once again, this confirms it all. So Mark Carney wants to pretend he's investing 5% of the GDP in national defense. So can you tell me why he also wants to contribute to the European Union's defense force? And they have this program called Rearm Europe. Now, I spoke about this extensively yesterday with Colonel Douglas McGregor. And I'll play a portion of the interview again, just in case you missed it, because it's really quite incredible. But before we do that, here's Donald Trump talking about Mark Carney. This is just astounding, because it's like you're watching theater of the absurd.
How was Prime Minister Carney towards you?
Very good.
Yeah.
It couldn't have been nicer. We enjoyed the Canada stay a lot. And I had to come back, obviously, for what's happening in the Middle East. But I got everything done. He's a good man. I think Carney's a good man. Very well, a good representative of Canada.
You think he's liked by the people?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure he's liked by a majority of Canadians. I know that. However, what is Mark Carney up to? Not just over the 5% thing, but he is on the verge of really potentially getting Trump mad if he refuses to buy the F-35s, the Joint Strike Fighter, which, of course, how many times have I said this? Jean Chrétien became prime minister in 1993. Well, the first thing he did was cancel the EH-101 helicopters, which were going to be used to replace the Sea Kings for anti-submarine warfare and the Labrador helicopter for search and rescue. How do I know that so well? Well, I was working at National Defense Headquarters in the Public Affairs Department in the Air Force, both of which these planes were going to be owned by. And I remember how hard we fought to get this through. Brian Mulroney promised 50. That was scaled down when Kim Campbell became prime minister, scaled back to 35. Jean Chrétien promised to get rid of this Taj Mahal of the Air Force. And that's the first thing he did as prime minister. However, Jean Chrétien, people forget this, bought into the F-35. And he included Canada into the planning program. So this is about 1995. How many years ago was that? 3 decades ago. 30 years ago, Jean Chrétien bought in to the F-35. And we still haven't got delivery. And Stephen Harper had 9 years to actually purchase it and get delivery. He did nothing. Justin Trudeau sat on it for another 8 years until they decided, well, we have to buy them now. We still haven't got delivery of one, and now Mark Carney's sitting on it. How do you think that's going to affect our relationship with Donald Trump? If Mark Carney decides to shelve the F-35, literally after 25, 30 years, and buy a European variant. Let's listen to what Colonel McGregor had to say about that.
Well, it's foolish nonsense, but let's talk a little bit about your prime minister who's made the decision.
By the way, the foolish nonsense he says there is in reference to the Rearm Europe program that Mark Carney is buying into at the cost of what, untold billions of dollars going to Europe to rearm.
To the founding of the Indian state, and you live in very close proximity to Russia. Why would you invest in military equipment for the United States when you have supply chains that have to reach, thousands of miles back to America? It's not going to happen. But I thought what was important about the exchange was Lutnick's insistence that that was important. Now, this is a real sore point with Donald Trump, because right now, when you look at our economy, what do we produce? Well, we produce oil and natural gas. We do have some mineral deposits, but primarily oil and natural gas. We also have a hell of a lot of coal, which we are not making full use of, that we can produce and ship overseas. The other thing that we produce, of course, are crops. We still are an agricultural power. We haven't managed it as well as we should, and we haven't capitalized on it the way we should, in my judgment, but we are still an agricultural power. But what do we manufacture? What do we build? Not much. As a result, we tend to build a lot of military equipment and stuff. And that is important to President Trump because it maintains assembly lines, it keeps them open. So if you really want to aggravate President Trump and you will really want to harm him in some way, you do exactly what your prime minister has done and say, fine, we're not going to use any of your equipment. We're going to use whatever is built in Europe. So that's the easy answer to the question about Canada right now and the attitude towards Trump.
Final question to Colonel. The Golden Dome. Donald Trump's talking about having a Golden Dome, not just over Israel, which is a much smaller area, but one over North America. And he's told Mark Carney, it's for $61 billion. You too can have membership in the North American Golden Dome. You've referred to the Golden Dome over Israel as a sieve because very, very little of the effort made to stop every missile from coming in actually succeeds. A lot of missiles are getting through. This is not a foolproof system. But two parts to this. Do you think the Golden Dome for North America is even militarily realizable? Is this some sort of abstraction, much the way the Strategic Defense Initiative was under Ronald Reagan? That was a great idea, but the technology wasn't there in the 80s. I'm not sure the technology is here in the 2020s to make the Golden Dome work. And what concerns me is that Planeteer is involved in this. And could this become not a mechanism for aerial defense, but for surveillance? And is this a possibility?
Well, that's quite a question. First of all, you're right. The Iron Dome is what you're referring to in Israel, and that has turned out to be far, far less effective than as advertised. But you've got to look at what people do in the defense industries, whether it's Israel or here or anywhere else. they always are hyperbolic and make claims that are simply not founded in reality. And that's the first part. The second part is the Golden Dome is very clearly a warmed over reiteration of the Strategic Defense Initiative. And the Strategic Defense Initiative was very, very popular. Why? It's a money pit. It transfers billions and billions of dollars in wealth from the American people to various corporate entities.
So two parts he addressed here. First of all, if Mark Carney buys a European and doesn't shop America, Donald Trump is going to be very PO'd, because what have they got left anymore in terms of manufacturing in the United States? As Colonel McGregor points out, the manufacturing has disappeared. They make a lot of bombs in the United States. They make a lot of aircraft. They make a lot of tanks. They make a lot of ships. They make a lot of military hardware. That's basically it in terms of manufacturing. And as he says, agriculture as well. And the second part, he's saying, don't spend $61 billion on the Golden Dome, because if it doesn't work in Israel, do you really think it's going to work over an airspace the size of North America? Think about the incredible area. And if it's not really working that effectively over Israel, if it's the iron sieve, do you really think it's going to work over North America writ large? I doubt it very much. And this, of course, is, the lesson we have to learn here is that if it's not a realistic concept, and that's why I asked him that question yesterday. Now let's move to Alberta, if we can here, where there was a by-election this week. I think it was Thursday, actually. And the Separatist candidate won 18% of the vote. The United Conservative Party, led by Premier Danielle Smith, won the by-election. However, 18% showing, pretty good. Would that 18% showing increase in a federal election? And does it represent the cutting edge of an independence movement that could actually win a referendum? These are the questions we need to know. So here's Daniel Smith.
That you're seeing was created in Ottawa by 10 years of terrible policy. And I think it can also be dialed down by Ottawa by undoing 10 years of terrible policy and allowing us to get back to investing and allowing us to be able to chart our own course as a province in our areas of jurisdiction. So I think that the jury is very much still out on the future of that movement, but I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to address these concerns so that that sentiment subsides.
Didn't sound exactly 100% on that one, but as I've said before, the by-election that really matters in terms of how Albertans are thinking about the separation/independence issue is the by-election involving involving Pierre Poilievre in the Crowfoot riding. This is a riding that Conservative members of Parliament have been winning with 70% of the vote. It's probably the safest Conservative seat in the country, actually. I don't know the current member from there who stepped down, so Pierre Poilievre could run there, but I do know his predecessor. And I remember him telling me it was one of the safest seats in the country, and 70% of the vote going to Conservatives. So what am I saying here? Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see how Pierre Poilievre defends federalism in that riding, because that riding, I can tell you, is probably vastly in favor of Alberta independence. Yeah, it's voted Conservative federally. And I'm not suggesting it's not going to vote. The residents of that riding are not going to support Pierre Poilievre. I'm suggesting he's going to be asked a lot of very difficult uncomfortable questions throughout the campaign about federalism and why he supports it and what difference is it going to make if we actually ever get a conservative government. These are questions he's going to get and he's going to have to answer. So it's going to be a difficult campaign for him. And that's something I've been talking about for quite some time in this by-election. And what I guess disturbs me the most is that in the brief period where we had Parliament resume, like 3 weeks back, 3 months back home, Pierre Poilievre, I know, was completely fixated on that by-election. He wants to get back in the House of Commons. And of course he does. I don't suggest he shouldn't be concerned about that. If he wants to be the leader, to continue to be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, he needs a seat. However, folks, he was a little too focused on that issue at times, and I think this is one of the reasons Bill C-5 escaped and got through. And I think that's this bill, which was wholeheartedly supported by the Conservatives. They say they gutted it. No, they didn't gut it. It was basically intact. This is C-5 is the one that's going to give Mark Carney authority to just move on ahead with federal projects without really seeking larger approval. Now, I really don't. I'm not one of these people. You have to have everybody in the country, all the First Nations on your side before you can move ahead. That's foolishness. But on the other hand, we don't want the heavy hand of the federal government making decisions in the back room without parliamentary approval. And that's what this bill potentially does. So we were hoping to have Lisa Robinson on the show today to talk about her latest issues, because she, believe it or not, they have the town or the city of Pickering, where she is a councillor, has suspended her salary again, and she's been ordered by a court to pay the city $30,000 in legal expenses. And of course, this is absolutely beyond belief that anybody would have to put up with this. And so we're standing by to see if she can join us. So she's en route to Ottawa right now, and she was hoping to do the interview while traveling. But I don't see her here right now, so we'll move on to our next issue here. Now, this is something I wanted to reiterate. Where is Donald Trump with NATO right now? Because this has been a NATO talking point now for the last 5 years, especially in the last 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. It's always been that Putin is trying to reimpose the old Soviet Union on Eastern Europe. And he won't stop with Ukraine. He's going to go into Poland and perhaps other neighboring countries, which I think is absolute nonsense. The problem with Ukraine, of course, is that Ukraine borders Russia and it can't be a member of NATO. And that's something NATO has never quite comprehended. It's amazing to me, everybody understood why the Soviet Union in the old days couldn't have nuclear weapons in Cuba, because it was right next to Florida and Texas. Everybody understood that was just impossible. We couldn't do that. So why should Ukraine become a member of NATO and potentially a base of operations for NATO missiles? Of course, it's not acceptable to Russia. And Russia has no intention of running off into Poland. And I want to play a little clip here from Redacted. You know, I'm a guest on the show every week. And I've remarked in the past about how the Gay Pride Parade in Toronto is suffering financially. They've lost significant sponsorship. And I just really, really love this interview. I'm going to show a bit of it. I invite you to watch the whole interview on Redacted. And Clayton and Natalie, have been very good to me, allowing me on the show to talk about Canadian politics every week. They've become very, very good friends in the virtual world. And I think they do a fantastic show, and I promote it as much as possible. And they're fearless in their opposition to lies, mendacity, and government BS. And they have a guest on here. This is Naomi Seipt. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. She's talking about why nobody dares to speak out against the increasing sexualization of these gay pride parades. They're not about human rights anymore. They're not about equal rights for homosexuals or gays and lesbians. They're not even about that anymore. They are a cyberitic exercise in excess. There, I can probably get that by the censors. But let's have a listen to a little bit of this interview, because I think it was really dead on.
Hungary's government banned the Budapest Pride Parade, citing child protection laws. I wonder why. Here is a screen from the Los Angeles Pride Parade recently. There is nudity. I tried to make sure there's minimal, but I mean, would you bring your children around that? We can take that down now. That's probably good. That's good. You've seen the butts. Whereas pride parades may once have been about equal rights for homosexuals, they have morphed into public celebrations of sex acts. I think we all can agree that if straight people pulled half the stunts we've seen at these events, they'd be shut down for indecency too. Well, European Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen threatened Hungary with sanctions over this ban. She says you need to let the Pride Parade go forward or else sanctions are coming. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban responded, telling her to mind her own business. So what's going on in Hungary? Why are they such a target? Joining us from Europe is independent journalist Naomi Seipt, or Seipt. I'm sorry, it doesn't, excuse my pronunciation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Particularly about this topic. This is very dear to my heart because I care a lot about, well, children, obviously, but especially because Ursula von der Leyen is obviously German. And we have a lot of these particular issues with the government romanticizing, glorifying the LG barbecue community, and completely hiding the fact that they are enabling pedophilia. And this is something that I've been calling out a lot in Germany, and especially some of my friends from the AfD, the opposition party. Vanessa Behrendt is a great example. She just recently hosted a child protection congress in Germany, and it's terrifying to see how it's particularly the left-wing parties that want to normalize stuff. Like we have public sex education pamphlets, guidelines that were introduced by the left and by the Green Party, where they encourage masturbation for toddlers, actual babies between 0 and 3 years old. Yeah.
I mean, in the AfD, I mean, you know, you'd be labeled the AfD party in Germany just being labeled extremist. So it's extremist to care about the nuclear family. It's extremist to not want, you know, grown men parading around naked in front of families on the street. Like, that's extremist now, Naomi.
Yeah, ironically. And this is not an exaggeration, by the way. I just went to a pride parade recently, kind of undercover, just to see what's going on. And there were many children running around and half-naked men, actually just wearing like a thong. And they encourage this for children because obviously all these icons, rainbows, and then unicorns, sparkles, of course that's appealing to children. I can only imagine, like, if I had been dragged to a pride parade as a child, I would have loved it because of all the childish motives that they use. They pretend to be childish themselves. And that's what makes it so disgusting. That is actual grooming. This entire ideology is meant to introduce children to it. And that's, by the way, why the left rely on immigration from all these countries where they reproduce like crazy, because their own people do not reproduce because they discourage it. They are against the heterosexual white family.
Right. I'm struck by what is freedom in Germany, because you don't have the freedom of speech. You don't have the freedom of press. But you have the freedom to have your private bits out in public. I'm so confused by this. And then, you know, when one of a quote from Ursula von der Leyen is that, marching for your rights is a fundamental freedom. But she did not really champion the rights of people who protested COVID restrictions. So I can't draw a straight line between what is freedom and what is a fundamental right in Germany.
It's complete moralism. It's not real ethics. It's not about defending the rights of LGBT people. It's not for the oppressed. It's just an agenda and an ideology, and they are trying to come up with these moral laws to defend themselves. And the most gullible people, especially young adults, teens, they fall for it. And they think if I'm running around with a pride flag, then I'm doing something great for the world. But they completely disregard the fact that there are many people who are speaking out against it for good reasons, like we elaborated on before. And they are oppressed, like they do not get any rights. In fact, my friend Vanessa Behren from the AfD that I just mentioned, she gets prosecuted by the state prosecution for calling out pedophiles who are actually running blogs, like public websites in Germany, where they encourage pedophilia and say that it should be legalized. But then the German media came out and said it should be illegal for Vanessa Behrendt to call out these pedophiles because they are not inherently criminal.
Watch the whole interview on Redacted. It's on yesterday's show. Encourage you to watch that. That's Thursday's show this week. And I'm hoping to get Naomi on this program in the next couple of weeks and to talk about the situation here in Canada and why we can't seem to exercise any sort of community standards with this. I'll be back in a minute with some concluding remarks and a little bit of a, shall we say, clarification about Bill C-5. Now, Bill C-5, I should clarify, it's not just a backroom dealing here. It's the potential for the crony capitalism that Mark Carney has benefited and profited from his entire career. When he talks about being in the private sector, you remember what Pierre Poilievre said? This guy is a grifter because he uses his political connections to make lots of money in the private sector. That's called crony capitalism. And it means that people like you and I who don't have these political connections don't have that kind of advantage. Mark Carney, who's got lots of political connections, this is a former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. This is a former UN ambassador for climate change, for UN goodwill ambassador for climate change. This is a globalist. And where do you think he's going to go with Bill C-5? It's going to be about corporations that he's friendly with. And you know what friendly corporations do for friendly politicians, don't you? Nothing ever changes in that game. And it's always the same case. One hand greasing the other. I'll slap your back if you slap mine. And that's what we have here with Mark Carney. Anyway, I hope to have Lisa on tomorrow. Obviously, something happened to her en route here. I think, in fact, she texted me and said there was just too many people in the train to do the interview. So hopefully we'll try again tomorrow, and we will have her go find the information in the description regardless, because she's a good friend of the station and we're a good friend of her work against DEI, against the woke policies coming from city politics, from municipalities in Ontario and across Canada. So we'll have that information there. Thank you for watching today, everybody. And we'll be back again tomorrow, same time. And I have been broadcasting live today from your nation's capital. God bless this country, what's left of it. Godspeed to all of you. And join me again tomorrow for another episode of Stand on Guard. Thank you and God bless.